Welcome and thank you for joining today's conference, the Western EIM Governing Body. Before we begin, please ensure you've opened the chat panel by using the associated icon located at the bottom of your screen. If you require technical assistance, please send a chat to the event producer. All audio lines have been muted until the Q&A portion of the call. We will give you instructions on how to ask a question at that time. As a reminder, this conference is being recorded. And with that, I'd like to turn the call over to Roger Collington.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Let me start off with a roll call of our EIM governing body, and then I will turn it to you, Chair Prescott. So, Chair Prescott, roll.
Here.
Vice Chair Decker.
Here.
Member Fong.
Here.
Member Linville.
Here.
And Member Konzioka.
Here.
All here, and we have a quorum, and we may proceed. So let me turn it to you, Chair Prescott.
Thank you, Roger, and welcome everyone to our meeting. The first thing on our agenda is public comment, and these are comments on items that are not on our decisional agenda item today. When we get down to that, after the discussion, we'll open it up to specific public comment. So is there any other public comment right now? Operator, if you want to check.
At this time, if you would like to submit a public comment, you can do so by pressing #2 on your telephone keypad. When you do so, your hand will be placed into the question queue. At that time, if your name is called, please state your name and question. Once again, pressing #2 will place you into the question queue, and once your line is unmuted, please state your name, affiliation, and question. At this time, I see no hands raised.
Okay, thank you, Ethan. With that, I think we turn it back to Roger for our general session minutes.
That's correct. Thank you. So we need a motion to approve the general session minutes of the EIM governing body from January 20th, 2021. Do I have a motion?
So moved. This is Rob.
Rob. And second?
I'll second it. It's Val.
Thank you, Val. And let me go ahead and just take the roll as a vote. Is it when people are on the phone? I think that's most efficient. So, Chair Prescott, your vote?
Yes.
Vice Chair Decker?
Yes.
Member Fong?
Yes.
Member Linville?
Yes.
Member Konzioka?
Yes.
Thank you, governing body members. We have passed the motion, and back to you, Chair Prescott.
Well, thanks again, Roger. Okay, so next up on our agenda is a governance review committee update, and to give that to us, we'll have Therese Hampton with the public generating pool, and also the chair of the GRC. So if we can get her unmuted.
Line has been unmuted.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thanks. Thanks for the opportunity to give an update. I'll first start with just a reminder of where we are in the process. We issued a revised straw proposal in December, and we took comment through the majority of January. And so the GRC has been reviewing those comments and contemplating next steps given those comments. And we will hold a general session meeting next Tuesday, March 16th from 1 to 2:30. And at that meeting, we'll give an overview of the comments that we received on the revised straw proposal and then discuss options and considerations that the GRC has engaged in to determine the next steps. As many of you might recall, we did have a target date of the end of Q1 of this year for a final proposal. I think I signaled last time I was here that it might take a little longer than that. And so we have received really positive support for a large portion of the recommendations in the revised straw proposal, but there are a few areas where stakeholders either have asked for more detail and clarity or have offered some alternatives, and those areas are going to warrant a bit more time. So we'll talk about that. Kind of for those reasons, the GRC has considered how best to proceed, and we'll talk about those options that we've discussed and our considerations at the next meeting and what we think the path forward looks like for the governance process. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Therese from the governing body?
Once again, you can enter the queue by pressing #2 on your telephone keypad. I'll go ahead and give it a moment to see if any join the queue. So far, I see no hands raised in the queue at this time.
Okay, thanks, Ethan. Okay, so I'm hearing nothing from the governing body on this. So, Therese, thank you for your leadership, and thanks for this report.
Great, thank you.
Okay, next up on the agenda is the Body of State Regulators update, and we have Commissioner Tawney from the Oregon Public Utilities Commission. If we can unmute Commissioner Tawney.
I see a hand raised. Commissioner Tawney, is this you?
This is.
You're good. We can hear you now.
Oh, wonderful. Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to provide another Bosser update to you. For the record, my name is Letha Tawney, and I currently serve as the Commissioner on the Oregon Public Utility Commission and as the Body of State Regulator Chair. Since the Bosser's last update to you in January, we have all, once again, been very busy with important market design and policy issues, as I know you have been as well. Just to start off, I'm very pleased to update you that as of February 19th, all the state-regulated market participants in the Western Energy Imbalance Market have entered a 5-year funding agreement to support the Bosser. And I know at the last governing body meeting, I reported that we were still crossing T's and dotting I's and wrapping up bits and pieces, but everything's done. And the ink has dried. And I think I just want to recognize what an important milestone this is for the Bosser and how many folks were really critical to getting this done that were just key to the success of this effort. I can't name them all today because I want to be considerate of your time, but at the top of the list is the GRC for shepherding this issue through their stakeholder process. I want to also really thank the state-regulated market participants, especially Sarah Edmonds and Eric Eisenman and Kalia Savage, for their perseverance and investment in this vision. Several current and past Bosser members really put forward leadership and outreach to make this happen, and the WEAVE staff has just been critical in helping us stay organized and on track and working through the myriad negotiations that were key to succeeding in this. So I'm so pleased to make the announcement. We're all formal and settled. And as we discussed at my last update, you know, I think this really points to the recognition of the benefits to the long-term stability of the market of having an active and engaged Bosser. We, of course, have a lot of work going forward, and so I want to comment on 2 of those today. I know you have on your agenda today the resource sufficiency issues, and I'm really glad to see you taking those up. The analysis of the CAISO operations during the tight conditions experienced during the 2020 heat wave seems to show that the EIM resource sufficiency evaluations not working quite as intended. And a review of that is part of the CAISO Summer Readiness Initiative, and CAISO is going to be presenting, of course, to you on that. The Bosser submitted consensus comments on the resource sufficiency evaluation on March 2nd. We provided principles that we put forward for you to think about and apply as you exercise your primary authority over this issue. First, we think that objective of the EIM resource sufficiency evaluation, ensuring that all balancing authorities participating have sufficient resource capacity to meet their demand obligations prior to receiving the benefits of participation in the EIM is really foundational. Resource sufficiency embodies the principle of no leaning and establishes that level playing field, that equitable state for all the EIM participants. Second, we put forward in our comments that the bid range capacity test should accurately measure each VA's supply and demand to determine correctly if the BA is resource sufficient. As analysis has shown, or seems to show, the BRCT seems to not be detecting capacity deficiencies under certain circumstances. So that warrants some closer look. And finally, from our perspective as the BOSSer, the consequences of failing the sufficiency test should provide appropriate economic incentives for BAs to use their forward procurement to acquire sufficient resource to meet their demand obligations in advance of their participation at the EIM. But I know there's a lot of discussion about what that is, what should those remedies be, and there's a lot to unpack and understand there. I had the opportunity yesterday to moderate a panel on resource sufficiency. I won't steal the RIF's thunder, but I found it a really great dialogue that really pointed to the discussions that still need to take place to reach consensus on even what is causing the inaccurate results. And further analysis, in our view, from CAISO would be really helpful in accurately identifying the flaws in the test and enhancing confidence in any proposed adjustments. And I think there's a role for more transparency about the test and who's passing and what hours that would help drive some of that understanding and incentives. It's also clear there's so much discussion yet to take place on the appropriate consequences of failure. Because the resource sufficiency is such a foundational issue, and we think the enhancements overall, beyond what you're going to look at today, need to be of the highest priority. We recognize that the recommended modifications CAISO is proposing today are limited just to changes that can be implemented by June, and we understand that logic. The BOSSer is really encouraged by the inclusion of some adjustments to the resource sufficiency that in this expedited proposal they've listened and adjusted. The BOSSer is also really encouraged by CAISO's announcement that they will open an initiative this spring to explore an out-of-market consequence for failure of the BRCT. The goal of the spring initiative is to have an enhancement implemented by August. The BOSSer encourages CAISO to expand the spring initiative to consider further adjustments to the test that will enhance its accuracy and that are achievable by August, recognizing the complexity. And we would really like to see a firm commitment to the development and implementation of a comprehensive solution to the test and the consequences of failure before the summer of 2022. So as you're thinking through what's in front of you today and you're thinking about forward steps, that's the BOSSer would put forward both the high priority of this and the need to really dig deeply on the causes and what the remedies might need to be when failure emerges. I want to turn to the Governance Review Committee, which we just heard about. We're very much looking forward to the Tuesday meeting. Just a couple of comments. We really, of course, as we said in our consensus comments, support joint authority between the CAISO Board of Directors and the EIM governing body, as you heard, as many stakeholders do. Movement to a more equitable and transparent shared authority model is an essential step in building the trust and paving the way for continued market expansion through other CAISO market options. And our consensus position continues to be reflected in those comments. There were, as you heard, really interesting comments submitted that were a little more detailed in this last round. And so to complement the GRC's process, in no way to step on or take over from, but to complement the GRC process, the CREPC YRAP Forum is planning a panel on this topic during their upcoming spring meeting. And that panel will provide stakeholders with different perspectives on the opportunity to engage and the opportunity to engage in an open dialogue in a forum that I think will reach beyond the stakeholders that are typically in these conversations and out into regional state government representatives, exposing them to some of the nuances of the issues that you and I and many of the folks on this call are very familiar with already. I personally think concretely exploring those nuances is really critical to finding common ground and clarifying the remaining concerns, and I was really pleased personally to see more concrete comments coming forward. I think that's real progress. That spring 2021 CREPC-YRAB meeting will be a series of webinars taking place in April because, of course, we aren't meeting in person yet, but we'll post the date and time for that panel on the WEAVE website. Finally, our next sponsor meeting is this Friday, March 12th. It will be more of an update meeting this time. We'll be reviewing with folks the status of the governance review and the governing body nomination process, the CAISO's review of the EIM resource deficiency evaluations, the results of today's meeting with you. It'll be an open meeting as it usually is, and the meeting information can be found on the Bosser meeting webpage, accessible through the WEAVE website, and we'll unveil our new logo as well now that we're funded in an organization. The Bosser Spring 2021 meeting will be Friday, April 9th. Again, it won't be in person. Like the CREPC-YRAB, it'll be virtual, and we'll announce that agenda. We are reviewing whether we can meet in person for our fall meeting. We'll make that decision probably in June. So if you have any questions, I'd be very happy to address them, and my door is always open, of course, if anyone wants to reach out. But thank you so much for the time.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Tawney, and congratulations on your funding agreement with WEAVE. I think we'll all benefit from that, no doubt. And also, we do acknowledge and appreciate the comments on the decisional items we have coming up today and the guidance that you provide. We do listen to that. So thank you, and for the rest of Bosser. To the governing body, do you have any questions for Commissioner Tawney?
Yeah, I was hoping to just sort of reiterate what you just said, John, which is to remind all of our listeners that this is a huge step, this funding agreement between the state-regulated entities and WEAVE/Bosser. It really helps to ensure over certainly a fairly long term, 5 years, it's a 5-year commitment, that Bosser will be involved in our EIM initiatives, that it will remain informed, it will be active. This is just something we look forward to, and again, as John said, I can't thank enough all of those of you who were involved in making this happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Val. Any other governing body members?
John, this is Rob. I just want to really endorse your comments and Val's comments. I was going to say the same thing. I think it is tremendous to have this executed agreement in that it's 5 years. So, it really gives legs under this to really have a forward focus, and I think it's terrific.
Great. Thank you, Rob. Okay, hearing nothing else. So, Commissioner Tawney, thanks for this report. Thanks for the work that Bosser does, and specifically thanks for your leadership in that venue.
Well, thank you all so much. Good luck with your decisional items today.
Thanks. We appreciate it. Okay, great report. Now moving on to the Regional Issues Forum, known as RIF, update. And for that, we've got the chair of the RIF, Pam Sporborg, who's with Portland General Electric. So if we can unmute Pam.
She has been unmuted.
Hi, John. This is Pam. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent. So yesterday we had another virtual meeting of the EIM Regional Issues Forum, and this meeting marked 1 year of us holding virtual meetings, which is its own important milestone. Yesterday we actually had record attendance for a regularly scheduled virtual RIF with a panel on resource adequacy and resource sufficiency. That panelists included participants from the Salt River Project, Bonneville Power, Deseret Power, and Pacific Gas and Electric. As noted by Commissioner Tawney, the panel was moderated by Commissioner Tawney, who is the chair of the Bosser. We also had a presentation on the ISO's load forecasting methodology from ISO staff. And as Commissioner Tawney noted, the Resource Adequacy Panel built on a number of the issues identified in the summer readiness workshops and really highlighted the importance of the request that the governing body issued to the RIF in your last meeting. This panel came about from some of the outreach that we conducted by the liaisons to address this issue and to ensure that there were all the topics had received significant opportunity to be shared. And I understand that in addition to the panel yesterday, there's been a number of stakeholders who have reached out to the governing body to share their insights directly. Chair Tawney noted in her report, the panel covered a number of key issues regarding the functionality of the resource efficiency test and offered some opportunities to address those issues in CAISO's upcoming initiative. We hope that it can be, the resource efficiency test can be thoroughly reviewed and that we can take really a comprehensive look at the functionality and purpose of that test to ensure that the market is functioning and supporting market participants going forward. The RIF liaisons are also looking forward to the next Governance Review Committee meeting, and we recognize that there will be some changes to the RIF that are on the horizon coming out of that meeting. We're prepared to move forward with these changes to ensure that the RIF will continue to provide the value that it is today and continue to provide that value into the future. We're excited to have the RIF grow along with the market, and we agree with a lot of the work that will be coming our way in the future. And with that, that concludes my report, and I am happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Pam. And unquestionably, the RIF adds value to this process. And it was not lost on us, and it was noted that through your efforts and the work of RIF, we received quite a bit of outreach and discussion on our upcoming decisional items. And that's always very helpful to help us better understand the issue and to get different perspectives on it. So you definitely fulfilled that request to get that item out for people to consider and come back to us. So thanks for that. So I would open it up to the governing body members if they have any comments or questions for Pam.
So this is Anita, and I just have a comment about yesterday's meeting. I thought it was an excellent panel, well facilitated by Commissioner Tawney, but really great speakers and great perspectives, and I just really appreciated the timeliness of your program. So thank you, Pam.
I'm glad to hear that we are.
Oh, go ahead, Pam.
Go ahead,
Pam. Were you going to say?
No, I was just going to say thank you. We try to have relevant and timely programming, and I think this was a really good opportunity to highlight some issues that are really squarely in the forefront of the work that needs to go on this year. So a good intersection of the RIF platform and the timeliness of this topic.
I just wanted to add real quickly a little bit of insight into the workings of our governing body here. Between the RIF and the BOSSR, we have quite a competition as to who gets to attend those because we're only allowed to send 3 people, and we all always want to attend these. So we just want you all to know that we really do value these 2 forums, and we get a lot out of it in terms of our own education. So thank you for holding those meetings.
Of course, and I know, we're always happy to take any follow-up questions or conversations if questions arise with the governing body that aren't addressed within the forum. Hopefully we will go back to in-person meetings in the future where some of those questions might be able to be answered more directly.
Okay, anything else for Pam from the governing body?
John, one last comment. This is Rob. And Pam, I just wanted to say I don't know, how you selected the 4 speakers yesterday, but as Anita and Val and John adequately stated, they really provided 4 divergent perspectives, and it seemed to do a good job of covering some of the bookends, and they each did an excellent job of explaining their perspectives. And I think that goes a long ways in showing the challenges that ISO has ahead of them in trying to balance all this. And I think it certainly helps us as we go through all this as well. And it's clear that from the amount of comments submitted and the participation that you had yesterday, that this will be a very robust process. And hopefully that gets us to the point to where we have this satisfactory outcome on resource efficiency. So thank you.
Well, we appreciate your continued emphasis of this topic and advocacy on this topic. We were looking for a diversity of perspectives on the panel, and I think we certainly got that yesterday. But we also recognize that the 4 perspectives shared are only one, a small component of the full diversity of perspectives that are across the region. And so we're glad that there will be more opportunity to address and air all of the different viewpoints through a stakeholder initiative, and we will continue to address this topic through the Regional Issues Forum as appropriate and to ensure that we really can continue to provide that diversity of perspective.
Great.
Okay, Pam, really appreciate your report. We appreciate the work that RIF does. You do some deep dives, and that's good information for everybody. And as always, appreciate your leadership of the same. So thanks for that, and we will move on to the next item on our agenda. And that is the decision on Summer 2021 Readiness Initiative. And Anna, I think you're going to kick it off, and then maybe Brad will present.
Yes, thank you, Chair Prescott, Vice Chair Decker, and governing body members. Good afternoon, everyone. We're here today to present 3 separate market enhancements to prepare for this summer in response to the market performance issues that we saw arise last summer during the heat events. And before I get started, I wanted to take just one moment to thank the stakeholder community for the significant engagement in this very important initiative. We started this initiative just 3 months ago and have been really engaged in a very rigorous stakeholder process. We can't thank the stakeholders enough for their significant feedback and engagement and really helping us hone in on what is necessary and feasible for this summer. Despite the fast timeline of the stakeholder initiative, we were able to receive significant valuable input, and we, as you will see, it shaped the proposals that we are presenting to you today. So thank you for your participation. And we recognize that we were not able to incorporate all the requested changes, or even some of the changes we ourselves thought of. But we found it was necessary to move forward at this time with the changes we knew we could implement for this summer. So we'll be presenting to you the changes we present to you today we know are feasible both for ourselves and we believe for our market participants. We recognize we're not done, and we do plan on continuing to engage with stakeholders to consider other potential changes, and we are committed to implementing future changes that are necessary as soon as feasible. I also wanted to note that you will not see in today's presentation proposed changes to the ISO's priorities in managing exports and wheel-throughs. We had hoped to complete that proposal by today and present it to you as an advisory item. However, based on stakeholder feedback, we separated that item out, and we're continuing to refine our proposal. We'll have to come back to you and present that in our final proposal with regards to the priorities in a subsequent meeting once we've completed that stakeholder process. With that, sorry about that. With that, I'll see if there are any questions and then turn it over to Brad Cooper, Senior Manager in Market Design Policy.
Yeah, Anna and governing body, this is Roger Collins, and let me just interject that for the record that we did receive a public comment letter from the Bonneville Power Administration, which has been provided to the governing body. So I think with that we can, I think with that we can move forward to the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. If there are no questions of me, with that I will turn it over to Brad Cooper, Senior Manager of Market Design Policy, and he'll be presenting to you the 3 items today.
This is Brad. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, I see the thumbs up from Carl. Okay. Good afternoon, Chair Prescott, Vice Chair Decker, and other governing body members. Like Anna said, this is our the decision on market enhancements for summer 2021 readiness. Next slide, please. We're proposing several enhancements to prepare for this upcoming summer in light of the performance of the ISO markets during last summer's heat events. The first change is to enhance the EIM's resource sufficiency evaluation to better ensure each BAA participates in the EIM with sufficient resources. And I should note here, like the comments earlier stated, and as were stated in our written stakeholder comments, that a large portion of stakeholders are strongly urging us to pursue further resource sufficiency evaluation changes. The changes that we're proposing here that I'll get into in a minute are the changes that we thought were feasible to go in with these other changes in this FERC filing we're planning to implement and then implement in June. But we're planning to start a separate stakeholder process dedicated to further resource sufficiency evaluation changes, both looking at the test itself, further analyzing the performance going back in the past to understand better that we've been able to do to date, where the gaps were, and then to look at the effect of changes, and then also to look at the ramifications for failing the resource sufficiency evaluation, as people have talked about. And then our intent would be to implement those changes as soon as they are feasible. The second change we're proposing as part of this is to enhance energy interchange modeling with the ISO BAA to improve operational performance. This came about as our review of last summer events also. And then finally, to enhance market pricing during tight supply conditions. And these are the conditions when the ISO BAA is arming load to meet its contingency reserve requirements, and then releasing some generation to serve energy for load rather than meeting contingency reserve requirements. Next change, please. So or next slide, please. So these first two changes, enhancements to the resource sufficiency evaluation and the enhancements to interchange modeling, are under your primary approval authority, and then this final change, the enhancement to the energy pricing, is under your advisory role, and we'll be presenting that one to the upcoming ISO board meeting also. Next slide, please. So as a number of people have pointed out, the resource sufficiency evaluation is a core component of the EIM, and it's intended to ensure each BAA in the EIM participates with sufficient resources to reliably serve its load, to minimize leaning. The resource sufficiency evaluation includes two tests that address leaning. There's a couple other tests, but they're not focused on leaning. The first test is the capacity test. It ensures submitted schedules and energy bids meet the load forecast or the BAA's load forecast. And then the flexible ramp sufficiency test, which ensures submitted energy bids provide sufficient ramping capability to ramp from the load forecast in one market interval to the next. And then it also includes an amount to account for this for net load uncertainty. And then failure of either of these tests results in capping the BAA's transfers at the amount scheduled in the previous market interval. So these enhancements result from concerns raised about the performance of the resource sufficiency evaluation during the August heat events there's concerns raised with the ISO passing the capacity test when it appeared to be short capacity, more specifically when it was in emergency conditions. And this likely means the resource sufficiency evaluation is not fully capturing resource needs and resource availability. So I would note that under some emergency conditions, when we have concern about contingency reserves and are taking actions to preserve contingency reserves, those are emergency conditions, but we would actually meet the capacity test in those during those times because we can meet our net load. That the concern is contingency reserves, which aren't covered by the capacity test. This review also identified some software errors that contributed to the ISO erroneously passing the resource sufficiency evaluation. These were partial resource outages, meaning a resource is not completely out, but its maximum capacity is derated for one reason or another. The test wasn't appropriately accounting for those. And then there was a software issue where it was double counting some energy transfers, and those contributed to the problems. And those are also targeted to be fixed by this summer. At the same time, we will put in the proposed enhancements I'll talk about in a second. Next slide, please. So the first change we propose is to enhance the resource sufficiency evaluation's capacity test to account for net load uncertainty in addition to forecast load. So net load is defined as a BAA's load minus its renewable output, and then the remainder or the net load is what you have to meet with dispatchable generation. And this net load can be significantly different than forecast. It can have larger forecast errors than just a load forecast because of renewable resources. For example, if solar production drops off suddenly, then the net load increases rapidly. The resource sufficiency evaluation's current flexible ramping sufficiency test, it evaluates ramping capability between intervals to get from one load forecast to the other, and then it also includes an amount to account for net load uncertainty, but it's just looking at the bids and the associated resources ramping capabilities. It's not looking at the overall capacity. So we're proposing this enhancement to put the net load uncertainty into the capacity test to better ensure that each BAA provides a sufficient amount of overall energy bids and the associated resource capacity to meet its net load, including this net load uncertainty. And I'll note that this requirement, this net load uncertainty requirement, it's similar to the requirement that the market calculates for the flexible ramping product. There are some differences in the timing and such, but it's fundamentally it's the same. And I would note that as part of the stakeholder process, we did examine some additional modifications. For example, accounting better for offline resources, which would entail accounting for a resource's startup time and determining whether that resource could be online. And the idea would be if it can't be online in time, you wouldn't count it towards the resource sufficiency evaluation. But that got very complicated because the resource may actually be available. The BAA may be making the resource available, bidding for it, and the reason it's offline is because the market optimization didn't think it was economic to start it, and we didn't think it was feasible to resolve that and figure out a way to address that on the timeline of these other changes we're making. And so I was actually in one of our original proposals. We dropped that from our final proposal to simplify things that we could implement in this upcoming filing and June implementation. But we will continue to look at things like that in this follow-up initiative. Next slide, please. So this slide just shows the formulas for the capacity text and the flexible ramping sufficiency test. And then in red, there it shows the addition of the net load uncertainty. So this is our enhancement to the capacity test. So the test would make sure that energy bids and schedules can meet the forecast demand plus the load uncertainty, and then accounting for net interchange in or out. And then the bottom equation shows there how the net load uncertainty is currently in the flex ramp sufficiency test, but you see that's just looking at the, so to speak, marginal ramping capability between intervals. It's not looking at the total capacity. So the two of these tests together, both including the net load uncertainty, should better account for the net load uncertainty. Next slide, please. So the second change we're proposing is an enhancement to, I'm going to get into jargon here, require automatic mirroring of ISO intertie schedule changes. What that is the market models interchanges between ISO's intertie scheduling points and a EIM BAA through a system resource that is linked to the intertie scheduling point. And these energy changes at the ISO scheduling points, that refers to imports and exports dispatched in it could be a day-ahead market import or export, or a HASP import or export. These are imports or exports that are separate from the EIM's resource-specific dispatch that results in EIM transfers. And what this system resource does is it adjusts the generation base schedules in the EIM area to reflect the interchange at the intertie scheduling point. And so under the existing rules, it's optional for EIM BAAs to elect to enable the functionality that will update the system resources schedule to correspond to intertie awards. We're proposing to get rid of making it optional and make this functionality mandatory because this an oversight in updating a BAA system resource resulted in operational issues last summer and caused issues with a BAA's EMS system during the tight conditions. And the opportunity for this to happen will be eliminated with the requirement to have the systems automatically updated. Next slide. So then finally, the third change we're proposing, and this is the one that's under your advisory role, is to make an enhancement to improve market pricing when system conditions are very tight and the CalISO is arming load to meet its contingency reserve requirements. Arming load is when system operators configure the system to be able to immediately perform controlled load shedding. And when they do that, the armed load can count for contingency reserves. And then this makes supply resources that were previously providing contingency reserves available to serve load, and the market then puts the corresponding energy bids for those resources in the market. What happened last summer is when that happens, in this situation, conditions are getting tight, and the price presumably would be going up, reflecting the tight conditions. But then when we armed load and released the contingency reserves, those bids actually went into the market and then lowered prices, which is kind of the counterintuitive result that you would expect. So we propose to fix this by, when we release these bids into the market, to price them at the energy bid cap, so the price will reflect the scarce conditions. This will provide more appropriate price signals during the tight supply conditions and will improve incentives. For example, day-ahead scheduled supply has or will have more of an incentive to be there. Otherwise, it has to buy back its day-ahead schedule at a higher price. Real-time supply, including or importantly imports, will have more of an incentive to be in the market. Imports will have more of an incentive to offer into the market because the prices will reflect the scarce conditions. And it provides better incentives for day-ahead load to more fully schedule in the day-ahead market because they're at risk of higher prices in the real time. Next slide, please. So stakeholders generally support, or in their comments they said they don't oppose adding that load uncertainty to the capacity test. The EIM participants, the Board of State Regulators, and our Department of Market Monitoring believe the proposed change and fixing the software changes are incremental improvements, and a lot of them caveat that comment with, well, you know, these are relatively maybe small incremental improvements. You really do need to do more, and they also point out that we need to look at modifying the consequences of the resource sufficiency evaluation. So, you know, like I said at the beginning of the presentation, we've heard those comments and take them seriously, and we're planning an initiative to examine these more comprehensive changes that were just, you know, simply too complicated to pursue on the timeline of what we're proposing here. Within California, you know, a couple entities, PG&E and our Public Utilities Commission, they opposed it. They stated that adding uncertainty to the capacity test and then the more frequent failures might have unintended consequences and harm reliability because we're then limiting transfers when a BAA is short. Our response is that's the intent of the resource sufficiency evaluation, is to avoid additional. Well, the intent is to make sure each BAA participates in the market with sufficient resources, and then the consequences for doing that currently are limiting the further transfers. We don't believe that making the test more stringent will harm reliability because there are always things out of the markets that BAAs can do to get energy from other BAAs aside from EIM transfers. The Market Surveillance Committee, and you'll hear from Dr. Harvey in a minute, they point out some of the complex market interactions between the resource sufficiency evaluation and our market. If you've read their great opinion on this, you can appreciate some of those, and those are the kind of the complexities that I was alluding to earlier. That we will have to consider when we're looking at more comprehensive changes. They point out that we should carefully test this, and we should retain the ability to reverse it. Like I said, we're planning additional analysis on the resource sufficiency evaluation, and we haven't got firm word yet back from our implementation people, but our intent also is to be able to put in the ability to reverse that. That would, of course, take a FERC filing, and that would be a last resort, but it's always good to be prudent in case something has unintended consequences. Next slide, please. And then stakeholders largely support the other changes. Virtually everyone supports the mandatory, or I could say I think everyone supports the the mandatory auto mirroring to improve operational coordination. Most stakeholders support our change to price energy at the bid cap when we're releasing contingency reserves and arming load, although the CPC and PG&E believe those changes need to be more comprehensively examined. They're apprehensive, I guess, lack of a better word, about putting in pricing changes like that on the relatively fast track that we've been going in this initiative. Then SCE continues to advocate to couple scarcity pricing changes with implementing system market power mitigation. This change we're proposing, while it'll provide benefits, we don't consider that akin to comprehensive scarcity pricing. We are also initiating a comprehensive scarcity pricing initiative coming up shortly, and we had committed to looking again at system market power mitigation in conjunction with that. But, you know, in sum, we think this change provides good incentives to the market. Next. So in summary, we request you approve the resource sufficiency evaluation change and the mandatory auto mirroring change and support our real-time scarcity price change. It's an incremental step to ensuring that EIM's resource sufficiency evaluation ensures each BAA can meet its net load, including load uncertainty, enhances interchange modeling, and enhances market pricing during the tight supply conditions. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Brad. I just wanted to open it up to the governing body. If you have any questions for Brad or Anna.
This is Anita. I have a couple questions. So when we had our briefing, I asked if the staff had done an actual simulation of the proposed RS changes. And so I was wondering, so my first question is, have they made any progress in actually doing a simulation?
Yeah, we have not done comprehensive simulations. The issue is to do those using our market software isn't feasible until we correct the other software bugs in the software, or I should say, simulating the change of adding uncertainty isn't feasible until we fix the outage problem and the mirror resource problem. But we will commit, though, to, as part of this upcoming initiative, doing some further analysis of this change and then also potential changes.
Okay. So a number of stakeholders have asked for greater transparency and the posting. If someone doesn't pass the RS test, what is staff planning to do with that?
Yeah, we've developed some additional reports on the results of the resource sufficiency evaluation and how often the various BAAs fail the various tests. And I just looked at that quickly this morning, and maybe Mark can help me out if he remembers. I don't recall if that is. I don't recall our plans for releasing that, but I know we plan to release that. I believe it's part of our market performance and planning forum coming up in the future.
Yeah, this is Mark Rothleader. Yeah, that's correct. We will incorporate that. We already have a segment on that, but we will expand the discussion there, where we can talk about the patterns and the metrics of performance, resource efficiency performance. And as part of the initiative, we'll take a deeper dive into specific events so that we can get to identify what else there may be to enhance.
I think John was muted.
Right. Go ahead, Val.
Oh, okay. My turn. Thank you. A couple of things. Brad, thank you very much for this presentation. You had mentioned that with this further stakeholder process that you will be initiating, you would implement would implement changes as soon as feasible. And I was just kind of wondering, what do you envision would be feasible? I mean, I'm really targeting this summer. Is it feasible to implement anything this summer? And if not, why not?
I'm sorry. Go on, Fred. Yeah, I think, part of the challenge in Brad, go ahead.
Okay. So when we start the stakeholder initiative, we plan to address two things in parallel: further enhancements to the resource sufficiency evaluation, and then further assessment of the repercussions of failing the test. And as part of that, we plan to also consider solutions that could be implemented quickly, like, for example, the idea of some kind of out-of-market payment at an agreed-to capacity rate that have come up. And so when we have those discussions, we'll look at both whether there's longer-term things that we want to put into the market for a penalty, or, if that's what people agree to, the penalty is appropriate, and then if people agree a penalty is appropriate, we'll look at things we can implement more quickly. If at all feasible, we will propose to implement those summer. It's hard to commit to that, though, till we know exactly what the solution is.
Okay, I understand. Thank you very much. That's very helpful. In this BPA letter that we received today, they suggest that in the interest of greater transparency, ongoing review of the resource sufficiency evaluation with routine reports of the results would be welcomed by the market. And I'm wondering, in terms of routine reporting, first off, what would be the lag time that you'd need to be able to assess if something did go wrong, what went wrong, and then how frequently could you produce a report?
The plans for the reports would be to produce them for the Market Performance and Planning Forum, which is about every other month. As far as diagnosing problems, that's out of my area a little bit. Sorry, I don't want to get too committal. It kind of depends on what the nature of the problem is. Whether it's something that it's obvious, or if it's something that there's a lot of things that involve complex there's a lot of things that involve complex interactions with the market that are hard to recreate, like offline in Excel, for example, and you have to do market reruns to get what the solution is, and those things can be more complex and take more time.
Let me add to this, if you don't mind. So
sure.
First, there is information available on OASIS, basically after the hour, that you can infer how the sufficiency test performed. for anybody, or at least whether there was a failure. There is some information there. I think we will commit to aggregating that and enhancing that reporting and we can report that out in the market performance planning form as Brad indicated. I think where we see some things that need further investigation, I think we will convene discussions, targeted discussions under specific events, and we can certainly do that as part of the initiative that would be underway. But even with outside the initiative, we can take some deep dives into particular events and have stakeholder discussions around observations that are of interest.
That's perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay, the other governing body questions or comments? Rob.
Thank you. Brad, thank you for this overview. I've got one clarification request and then one question. On the clarification, it deals with the auto mirroring. I think it's helpful to understand, at least for me, that a little bit of the evolution of the EIM got us to where we are today. And I just wanted you to clarify that's correct, that the only reason we don't have auto mirroring already is because we didn't necessarily start off with it and then it got implemented later, and then, it wasn't required as a mandatory go-back fix, and then effectively that's where we are now. Is that correct?
Yeah, the auto mirroring was a feature we added, time. I want to say a couple of years ago, but it's probably more like 5 years, or maybe longer. Time flies. That was part of one of our EIM enhancements initiatives a number of years ago, and that was it originally was a optional feature that EIM participants requested to make their operations easier, and so that's why it was originally optional. But now, looking at the performance, it makes sense not to have it optional. Things will work better and avoid problems if it's always enabled in the market.
Yeah. So thank you on that. That's good. The question I have deals with the resource efficiency, and I'm planning to ask this question of Ryan and Dr. Harvey. And that is, EIM had really good performance, all the way up to August of 2020, and, there wasn't this issue with resource efficiency. Then it surfaced during this, stress condition within California and across the West. And as this interim improvement to resource efficiency is implemented for this year, do you believe that this enhancement is going to have any impacts during this normal range of operation? And will we only really see a difference during the stress conditions, or do you think it's also going to move back down and also, as you noted, have drive increased capacity under the normal operation range?
Yeah, I can't answer specifically without the detailed analysis that we're talking about doing, but we have had since the inception of the EIM, there have been resource sufficiency evaluation failures and limiting of transfers periodically. So I would anticipate that this addition to the capacity test will also come into play during the non-extreme conditions like we had last summer. These things really became more of an issue, though, when we were under such extreme conditions last summer, and load shedding, and then yet passing the resource sufficiency evaluation, or failing but still allowing transfers, and that kind of brought the concerns to a head.
Thank you. Okay, so we probably just one last shot for the governing body, Anita. You're muted.
Anita, your line is muted.
Chair Prescott, after Anita, this is Elliot. I'd like to offer a quick comment.
Okay. Still can't hear you.
Trying to speak and you're checking your phone line, can you also ensure that your line is connected? I know from time to time sometimes they can drop, so just verify your connection and or if your personal device is muted.
Oh. Well, I guess, Anita, if you can hear me, maybe we'll go to Elliot's comment, and then while we're working on your audio connection, then see if you're back up and running. Is that okay with you? Shake your head, or? You there, Anita?
If she can hear us, there is also the option of the chat room, which I've had to resort to at times when I was having technical difficulties.
Okay. Okay, so looks like we're looking at each other like a deer in the headlights. So perhaps, Ellie, you go ahead with your comments, and then we'll see if we can't get Anita's comments either with a different connection or through the chat. So, Elliot, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Prescott. I just wanted to offer, in summary, I just wanted to make it absolutely unequivocally clear, just from myself and on behalf of the entire team here today, that the sufficiency elements of the EIM are just absolutely foundational, and there should be no question whatsoever that we are unequivocally committed to addressing the issues that we found last summer. I think certainly these initial set of changes are a step in the right direction, but we recognize it's not the end of the conversation, both for 2021 and beyond. We are committed to the transparency principle. I think those are some good questions. We'll continue to try to provide our market participants and others the best information we can about whether the fixes that we're taking on are going to adjust the issues, continued monitoring and evaluation. And then I think this conversation for summer 2021 will be important. We recognize the level of focus and concern amongst the participants to make sure that we understand what the appropriate consequences should be of failing the test. Obviously, I think we all know that we're trying to be a little bit conservative about not doing too much additional market programming as we go into the summer. But if there's an out-of-market fix that the members and the ISO can come to an agreement upon, we'll certainly be looking at that. I just want to make sure that I emphasize that, and we really do appreciate the feedback we've represented, and I've always known, as long as I've been around the EIM, that if we don't get this element of the market right, we've got much bigger issues. So thanks for all the feedback, and appreciate the opportunity to present here today.
Thanks, Elliot. Great comments. Really spot on. One more shot, Anita. Are you live? Can't hear you.
Anita says she can hear us, even if we can't hear her.
Okay. Well, at this point, there is the chat option if you want to try to enter a question. Okay, then what we'll do is move on, and we'll work on your audio connection. But before we vote, we'll make sure that you somehow get your question out on the table and asked. Okay?
Really quick, this is Ethan, the event producer. Anita, I'm going to ask if you could press #2 on your line to raise your hand to see if you may have moved over somehow. If you could do that real quick, and you guys can proceed with your conference.
Okay. Well, next step is we're working on that, and I apologize, Anita, for that. We have the Department of Market Monitoring comment, and Ryan Kurlinski is going to be the spokesman for DMM. So if we can unmute and make sure Ryan's available.
Okay, John.
I've unmuted 2 times. I have Anita Decker back.
Okay. Thanks, Ryan.
Okay. Yes. Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Fantastic. All right. Good afternoon, Chair Prescott and Vice Chair Decker and the rest of the governing body members. This is Ryan Kurlinski from the Department of Market Monitoring. Thanks for this opportunity to provide DMM's views on the specific items from the Summer Readiness Initiative that the ISO has brought to you today. Let's start off with the resource sufficiency test. DMM supports the ISO working towards a bid range capacity test that can accurately validate if a balancing area has enough capacity to meet its load and export obligations. The changes the ISO is proposing as part of the current initiative are a step in the right direction, so DMM supports them. First, the ISO should clearly fix the software defects that they identified in the capacity test, so we appreciate the ISO identifying those and getting them fixed for this summer. These changes should have an impact in terms of making the test more accurate. During the crucial hours of the August heat wave, these errors resulted in counting thousands of megawatts of non-existent imports and derated generation capacity towards meeting the CAISO VA's capacity obligations. Next, on the issue of adding uncertainty onto the capacity test requirement, we agree with the ISO and EIM entities that it is appropriate to add uncertainty over a VA's net load onto the capacity requirements that the VA needs to meet in the capacity test. So we support that aspect of the proposal. But we also continue to agree with the EIM entities and CAISO that the capacity test needs more work on top of what the CAISO could get done in the tight time frame of this initiative. I think going all the way back to around EIM's inception, we've been recommending that the ISO consider an out-of-market capacity penalty rather than freezing the EIM transfers when a VA fails a resource sufficiency test. So we support the ISO starting a stakeholder initiative to re-examine the consequences of failing the resource sufficiency test, and we support making that initiative a high priority. But we recognize that determining consequences of a VA failing the sufficiency test, the consequences that can just the right incentives is difficult but really important. On the one hand, the consequences should deter systematic leaning on other VAs, but it shouldn't prevent periodic and beneficial sharing of resources between the VAs. We also agree with the EIM entities that the way the capacity is currently counted towards meeting the capacity test is too simplified. We did caution, though, during this short stakeholder process that some of the quick fixes proposed by some parties were also too simplified, like not counting any offline capacity or any offline capacity with startup times greater than an hour. So getting the capacity test right is not straightforward. We support the ISO continuing to work with stakeholders on designing a capacity test that can more accurately assess if each VA has enough capacity to meet its load and export obligations. But in the meantime, we support the ISO moving forward with implementing the fixes and enhancements they have brought to you for a decision today. Okay, so moving on now to the real-time scarcity price enhancements. DMM supports the ISO's proposal to use the $1,000 or $2,000 bid cap as the energy bid price for those generators that were providing operating reserves, but which get moved into the 5-minute market's energy supply stack when load has to be armed, that is to potentially shed load in order to provide reserves. This would set the 5-minute market energy price at the bid cap when any of these former reserves are actually needed to meet energy demand. We agree with the ISO that prices should go to the bid cap under these emergency conditions. We've also noted that as part of this broader summer readiness initiative, the ISO is proposing some changes that would tend to allow high prices near the bid cap to occur when reliability demand response resources are dispatched within the ISO. So both the operating reserves proposal in front of you today and that reliability demand response pricing proposal should help to set prices in the 5-minute and 15-minute markets at or near the cap during very tight system conditions, like when emergency demand response or the potential to shed load in a controlled manner is needed for energy or operating reserves. So together with a third proposal in the Summer Readiness Initiative to guarantee hourly block imports their bid price, we think these pricing changes should help to accomplish a lot of the intended goals of scarcity pricing, right, is to attract imports to the CAISO VA and incentivize resources to perform when regional conditions are tight. Thanks again for your time, and I'd be happy to try to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. Governing body, any questions for Ryan, DMM? Bob?
Thank you, John. Ryan, I don't know if you were on the call when Brad was going through his presentation and answering questions, but I'd like to pose a similar question that I had.
Yeah, let's see, you cut out there. Yeah, no, I think you're asking if the interim improvement will make a difference during normal operation, right? That was the question? Yeah, no, I think, similar to Brad's, I think that would be hard to assess. It might depend on it might be different for different balancing areas. I think that would be hard to assess without doing the analysis, for each BA, looking back over time to see, building a shadow system to see the different components of the test and how much impact each of the errors that they're fixing had. I think that would require some more analysis to really determine that. And again, it would probably depend on the DA.
Rob, were you able to hear the response? Just shake your head. Or are you completely offline? Judged by the lack of movement, I would say that you're completely off. Well, it's all right, but I guess we can pass that answer on to him once he gets reconnected. So thank you, Ryan. Any other questions for Ryan? Okay. Okay, he's saying hold on. He's almost there. Sorry, it looks like you might have to repeat that answer, Ryan, once we get him back up and running. Boy, I love this virtual world. Can you hear me, Rob? Can you hear me? Okay. Did you hear Rob's response? Oh, okay. So you heard Brian's response. Oh.
I may have muted his line. He may have just dialed back in.
Okay. I've dialed back in. I think I can hear, but I did not get a chance to hear Ryan's response.
Okay, Ryan, if you can give it another shot.
Pressure's on, yeah, but I say the same thing twice here. I think that would be. I think it would probably depend on the balancing area, because I think your question was about would the changes that they're doing right now, these interim changes, or these quick changes they're proposing here, would it impact? Would it make a difference during normal operations? I think that's tough to tell without us building kind of a shadow system and really assessing what were the different elements that may have that went into the different VAs passing the test during different conditions. So I wouldn't want to get too much into that and make assumptions without until we're able to kind of build that kind of shadow system and see what the impacts of these changes may have been. But again, I think it probably will depend on the balancing area and how much kind of extra capacity each balancing area is bringing to the EIM during normal operating conditions.
Ryan, I appreciate your comments on that. Thank you.
Yep, thanks.
Okay. Getting no further hands waving at me. So thanks, Ryan. Always appreciate DMM's input on these decisions. So with that, we're going to move on to the Market Surveillance Committee comment, and that's going to be presented by one of the members of that committee, Dr. Scott Harvey. So if we can unmute Dr. Harvey's line, please.
I believe his line is unmuted.
Okay, this is Scott Harvey. I believe my line's been unmuted. I think what I'll do is instead of starting by talking about the overall design, I'll talk about the question we just got into. And I think that's one of the things we have to go carefully about, because we have to be concerned about how these things work under normal operating conditions, not just under stressed conditions. We don't want to be so fixated on this is a good idea under stress system conditions that we create something that freezes companies out of the EIM under normal operating conditions. And some of those things are the rules about offline units. Well, a unit might be offline because we're drowning in solar or drowning in run-of-river water, and there's no reason to put a unit online to create additional emissions. So we don't want a balancing area to fail because they don't put the unit online. Another issue is you got to be very careful about putting ramp constraints into this test. I've had experience in this in some of my price correction work where I've seen that kind of stuff can go very, very wrong when you've got a lot of extra capacity online and units appear to be ramp constrained, but the reason they're ramp constrained is they're not needed. So we want to be, those are some of the things we said we got to be careful about how we do that. We're also, BPA and others have expressed concern over the past year, as we've noted, about how well the histogram works. And, the CAISO is working on fixing the histogram, but it isn't fixed. So we don't want resources also to fail and have draconian penalties if they fail because the histogram is giving them an inflated target and they're using their resources because the solar went down. Well, if the solar's already gone down, you don't need to worry about it going down. So that's why we think all of these things, some of these things are fine to do, others we need to think about because we need to think about how is this going to operate under normal operating conditions and are they going to trigger, sanctions when they shouldn't. So that's a long answer to your question. I'll then turn to the resource sufficiency in general, and I think we've listened to many of the Eim entities and had the same concern, the concern we heard this morning from Commissioner Tawney and from many entities in their comments, both orally and written, that how could the CAISO have passed this test when they're in a stage 2 emergency? And that's one that we discussed in the posted opinion. We dug into it. We explained why we think that might have happened, and maybe it was the intended outcome. Now, we haven't reviewed all the details of the calculations and the MSC. We don't have any visibility in the underlying data. So this is just what we've tried to figure out conceptually. Now, one concern that a lot of the EIM entities had, and I think it's behind everybody's mind, that the CAISO passed the test because they had all this EIM transfers, and that allowed them to back down their generation. Now, as far as we can understand, the way the test is designed, that can't happen because those EIM transfers get added on to the load target so that it nets out. Now, that doesn't mean that happened in the software, but if the software operated intentionally, that's not how they passed the test. And the CAISO ought to, validate that and provide more transparency into this calculation because I think it's intrinsic to the building confidence. It's a question everybody has. And then if that's not the problem, we get to the question that all the other EIM entities have had, and I've seen BPA point to Table 17 on the January 13 slides and others. How did you pass when you were in stage 2 emergency? And we think the answer has a number of parts, which we go through in the opinion, but we think the key ones are, first, that when the CAISO armed load, they made that generation available. The generation that had been providing reserves for, in 500 megawatt increments became available to meet load and to meet the bid sufficiency test. So there was that they had to enter into a state of emergency in order to do it, but once they armed the load, that made resources available. The other thing, like many, regulated utilities have this feature. I know in the MISO it's very common that the demand response can only be activated in emergency conditions. Well, the CAISO has a lot of reliability demand response that can only be activated in emergency. Well, they did activate it. Well, once they activated it, that demand response was reduced their load and freed up generation to pass the bid sufficiency test. So these are a couple of reasons we have to have in mind about why the actions they would have been taking might have allowed them to pass the test. Now, we haven't been able to validate that. We haven't seen the data. And there are a couple other factors we talked about in the opinion, but I won't go over it. Those are the things we think are most important. But as we talked about in the opinion, we think the CAISO has to be more forthcoming in validating and explaining how these factors enabled them to pass the test. Over the years, I've had a lot of people tell me that software solutions were working just fine and the settlement systems were working fine, and in fact, they were completely broken. And I know it's not enough for the CAISO to tell you it's working. And I think the CAISO has to do more to say, okay, here's what we tested, here's how we tested it, and here's some of the results. And I think they can do that. And they can tell you, okay, here's what, after we armed the load, here's much generation we had. If we back out the EIM transfers, here's how much bid range we had. I don't think that gives away any confidential information, but if they did that for a couple of these intervals, I think it would provide a lot more transparency and understanding on the part of the EIM entities and yourselves on what happened. And I think that the CAISO's got to do it. And if there's something else there that they haven't figured out, then we need to fix it. And it could be something we can fix easy by summer, or it could be something that's going to take a long time to fix. But until we figure out if there is something else, we don't know. So that's the basics of our comments on the resource sufficiency test. And we notice we didn't make strong recommendations. We're saying the CAISO, we have to figure this out, and the CAISO has to explain more and provide more transparency so everybody can understand what happened. And from there, we can go on and decide what we want to fix. Now, the MSC does support the other part of this, the scarcity pricing initiative, and we agree with the comments. It's not a complete scarcity pricing design. It's far from it, but it's a critical step that the CAISO has to take to avoid a repetition of what happened. When we got prices that were completely inconsistent with system conditions, the CAISO had prices of $100 after they'd armed load as they were sliding into shedding load, and those low prices may have ensured that the load shedding occurred when they didn't have to. So that, and again, it's the arming of load is a critical point of this, because when the CAISO armed the load, they just slid that into the bid stack without implementing any shortage pricing, without doing any adjustments to the offer prices. Now, that's the same thing that every other EIM entity would do. All the other EIM entities, if they took actions to activate demand response or they did something to replace their reserves, they would just make the generation available. But they would also be buying imported power. They'd be making phone calls and entering the transactions to buy imported power because that's the way the markets work. But the CAISO, that doesn't happen. The CAISO has to send a price signal. So the CAISO has to put these changes in place soon, which means by this summer, so that we don't have a repetition of the events in which the CAISO arms load and then prices go down and we relentlessly slide into load shedding because the price signal is saying, no, we don't need power, don't bother. So those are our comments on these two initiatives, and I think the scarcity pricing is critical and it will also reinforce some of the problems that the CAISO had that may have contributed to the resource sufficiency because the prices will be high enough to attract imports. So I'll stop now and be glad to take questions.
Okay, thank you for that report, Dr. Harvey. I really appreciate the depths that you guys go to with these different things. It really helps with our decision making. And I agree, there needs to be more transparency, more analysis. We've heard that from a lot of stakeholders to answer really the basic question that you pose, and that is why the ISO passed the RS test back in August during these events. So anyway, I do appreciate your work and your report, but I'm going to open it up to the other governing body members if they have any questions for the MSC. Dr. Harvey? Val?
Hi, thank you so much, Dr. Harvey. I did read your paper more than once just to be able to absorb it. I was wondering whether or not you thought the do nothing versus what's currently being proposed for this sort of scale down initiative was the better option. I wasn't actually clear on that.
Well, we think the CAISO should fix the software flaws that are known, and I think they have to explain to all the EIM entities how they passed that resource sufficiency test, and if there's something that's wrong, then they need to fix it. But we don't know what that is at this point. As far as we dug into it, the reasons they passed the test are factors that we know about. They activated demand response, they armed the load, and then because the prices were low, there were imports they didn't schedule. If there's something else, the first step is to find out what it is, and if it's something we can fix quickly, they should fix it quickly. Some things might take longer than the summer, but some things could be fixed in, a week. And we don't know until we know that there's something else that needs to be fixed, what that is.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
Anita, did you have something?
I do. So this actually was the issue that I was trying to get at earlier with staff. So, Dr. Harvey, thank you very much. And I was coming at it from, this was in the MSC report, how is staff reacting to it? And then I got cut off on the audio. So, at any rate, I want to say thank you, and what I really appreciate, and if people have not read the MSC's opinion here, that in the summary, that last paragraph where you talk exactly what you're saying, that there needs to be still a deeper dive on what occurred, and then transparency of what did occur to make sure we are fixing all of the right issues, and that there's not something else that we're going to miss. Because what we miss is going to end up with likely with some unintended consequences. So I am concerned about that. So I hope that, again, it's doing the simulation, it's what actually went wrong. So I just appreciate the MSC also bringing a highlight to that.
Thank you.
Okay. Rob, Carl, anything for Dr. Harvey? Carl?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Harvey. Maybe I'm dense, but I'm going to ask Val's question over again. I'm not sure whether you're recommending against implementation of staff's proposal pending further investigation.
No, we're recommending approval. No, we're recommending that they do what they said they're going to do, but they also need to dig in more and be more forthcoming to the EIM entities about how they passed, because that may identify other things that need to be fixed by summer. But they ought to do, they certainly ought to fix the errors they've identified. That's clearly needs to be done.
Okay, thank you.
This is Mark Roth there. Could I respond quickly?
Well, of course you can, Mark.
Okay. First off, I appreciate Dr. Harvey's comments. I do want to make a point that in the time that we had a great deal of discovery, discussion, and diving into how the sufficiency test worked. We had some individual discussions, deep dive discussions with EIM entities, and then we broadened it to all stakeholders, which led to the identified improvements and enhancements that you have today. We are fully committed to continuing that deep dive, transparent discussion to identify what, if anything, else there is to improve upon the resource sufficiency test. We could not wait to get these to you and start acting on what we have today. That does not mean that it stops here. We will continue to dive, and we will continue to work transparently with the stakeholders to identify what, if anything else, can be done. Some of that may not be able to be done this summer. Some of it may be able to be done this summer. We have not identified anything specific and actionable at this point, but when we do, if and when we do, we will address it. I assure you of that.
And Mark, this is Elliot. And Chair Prescott, if I could, just because I think this is obviously so foundational, and we're hearing it. And I guess I would also offer to Dr. Harvey, I'm hearing two things. There's the forward fixes, but I think folks are still scratching their head on the forensics of kind of a look back. What exactly? Folks are still asking why. Why did this happen? What else can we sort of dive into that might provide explanatory value as to why the CAISO actually still was able to pass the test given these circumstances? So hear that, and to the extent we can do this, Dr. Harvey, I'd even appreciate an opportunity to kind of sit down with the MSC folks and think about some of the pointed ways that we might be able to mine into that, because clearly this is just so foundational for all of our market participants, and we just can't have any lingering doubts. And so I'd like to set up the questions, and then I'd like to also create another opportunity for us to convene maybe another EM governing body meeting where we really try to resolve this issue. I think if we don't satisfactorily address these questions and then agree as a community that we've answered them to our satisfaction, it's just going to linger, and we got to get it sorted out.
I don't know, Dr. Harvey, if you wanted to respond to that, or.
No, I think that's right, but I think that the CAISO can just be a little more forthcoming about what they did. I mean, they can show here's the bid range that was used to pass the test after we made these corrections. That's on the page 17 of the January 13th. They can then show how much of that was available because they armed load. They can show, that's why they passed that, but we're in a state emergency because the armed load provided 500 megawatts of that. And how much of that was made available because they activated the demand response? And how much of the bid range that they've got is the FMM imports that were counted but weren't scheduled because the price was low? And I think if they'd show that those components account for, their ability to pass the test and show that they correctly calculated the bid range and subtracting out the EIM transfers and what those numbers were, I think that a lot of the stakeholders would be more comfortable.
Okay. All right. Okay, governing body.
So Chair Prescott, we'll identify a couple of those key residual questions. We'll circle back with the MSC and others, and let's go dig them up and let's try to get some good answers. So again, I just want to make sure all of us we just get it. We're going to go get it sorted out, and we'll make it happen. So thanks for the feedback. It's good, honest. This is why we have a surveillance committee, this kind of level of scrutiny of what we're doing, and we embrace it, and let's go get it fixed.
Okay, thanks, Elliot. We appreciate that level of commitment that you have. So it is definitely an identified issue, and I think if we all work together, we can get resolution on it. So, governing body, anything else for Dr. Harvey? All right, with that, MSC and Dr. Harvey, thanks for the work you do. Like I said, we really appreciate it, and it really helps with our decisions.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Okay. All right, next up, we've got, I think it's the public comment section. Before we go there, I want to, again, acknowledge that we got written comments from the Bonneville Power Administration that we've all looked at, and we got comments this morning that had already been submitted from the bosser, so we have those. And at this point, we need to open up the phone lines and see if anybody wants to make a public comment on this decisional item, any of the three items, actually. Ethan?
All right, as we move to the public comment, I already see one hand raised in the queue, but just a brief reminder, you can enter the queue by pressing #2 to enter the queue. First caller, you are unmuted. Please go ahead.
Chair Prescott, can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. It's Mark Simons at the Bonneville Power Administration. So Chair Prescott and Energy Imbalance Market governing body members, as you've all mentioned and discussed, Bonneville did submit a letter here this morning and appreciate the governing body and all the stakeholders' consideration of that letter. As we indicated, the Bonneville Power Administration would like to specifically express our support for the CAISO's proposed changes to the resource sufficiency evaluation that have been discussed here today, and our appreciation for the CAISO's commitment, reiterated again here today, to conduct a subsequent stakeholder process to address the remaining resource sufficiency evaluation issues. We also, as we've talked about, same as Dr. Harvey outlined, this is important because the proposed changes to date, at least in our opinion, either don't fully address or don't clearly address the significant inaccuracies in the resource sufficiency evaluation results. And we strongly agree that addressing these deficiencies, as discussed here today, should be highly prioritized in the upcoming resource sufficiency evaluation initiative. We really appreciate all the comments by the CAISO here today expressing their support for that forensic analysis. Really important in terms of building confidence and having that type of crosswalk of available capacity shown to the CAISO Balancing Authority would be really helpful to allow the proper diagnosis and prioritization of these further enhancements. So I appreciate the opportunity to comment here today and really appreciate the discussion that's been had here. Apologies for the sound in the background, but again, appreciate the discussion. This has been a great conversation here today and look forward to having more of them. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Mark, and our friends at BPA. Appreciate your comments. Ethan, do we have anybody else in the queue?
Yes, we do. I'll go ahead and move on to the next caller. Caller, you are unmuted. Please go ahead and state your name and affiliation. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Partham Malavadkar with Pacific Gas and Electric. Thank you, Chair Prescott and EIM Governor, for the opportunity to speak with you today. We really appreciate the work that CAISO staff and management has made in advancing the summer readiness enhancements and support the CAISO's efforts to find any near-term solutions to improve grid reliability this summer. We know, however, that the scope of this initiative covers many complicated market rules, which CAISO spent the last decade plus developing. so at least I'd highlight that the risk for unforeseen consequences is high given the fast timeline. Foremost among the changes that we believe are critical in fixing are the scheduling priorities of exports, load, and wheeling, which is now slated to come back to the EIM board this April. But I wanted to take the opportunity to explain a couple of our concerns that the ISO included in the paper, which we believe could exacerbate rather than improve reliability for many participants, not just the CAISO BAA in the summer of 2021. The first one I want to highlight was related to the EIM sufficiency test. On its face, this change for adding net load uncertainty seems reasonable, and I can certainly understand why the CAISO might consider making this enhancements in the long run. However, for the summer of 2021, we believe the addition of this test appears more likely to jeopardize regional grid reliability during emergency conditions than to improve it. Many potential flaws, as you all have been discussing in the resource sufficiency test, have been identified by the CAISO, MSC, and DMM. Some of these potential flaws could result in BAs passing the test when they should have failed. Other potential flaws could result in the BA failing the test when they should have passed. So expediting one market change here that's more likely to cut off a BAA from the EIM based on this uncertainty enhancement doesn't seem prudent. Particularly the fact that we're 3 months away from the summer and the procurement options available to help pass the test are likely limited. The second item that I want to comment on is related to the scarcity pricing enhancements. PG&E is concerned that the proposed enhancements could have the unintended consequence of incenting physical withholding, thus exacerbating reliability concerns, and undermining the Order 831 price verification processes. CAISO's Order 831 implementation allows for bids to be submitted up to $2,000, but requires internal bids and certain bids at the enterprise above $1,000 to price verify their costs. Under this proposal, if CAISO has a price verified bid of, say, $1,001 megawatt hour, it will actually raise the scarcity pricing level associated with releasing reserves to $2,000 instead of $1,000. We're concerned that this could actually incent participants to physically withhold in order to drive the prices to higher scarcity level if that load is needed to be, if the reserve need to be released and load is triggered. If the scarcity status is at $1,000 instead, we believe that this could help address the concern, or setting at the highest verified price bid also is an alternative that the EIM should consider. Finally, I note that PG&E has requested CAISO commit to an after-fact review to examine the effectiveness of all the changes implemented through this initiative, particularly any market rule changes that have not been developed through the standard and complete stakeholder processes should have a sunset provision at the end of 2021. So thank you again for the chance to comment, and please let me know if you have any questions.
Well, thank you, Parth, and to our friends at Pacific Gas and Electric for all the time you've spent on this and your comments. We do really appreciate that. So with that, I'm going to ask if there's any more comments in the queue, Ethan.
We do have one more question in the queue. Would you like me to put them through now?
Please.
Okay. Caller, you are unmuted. Please go ahead, and please, as a reminder, state your name and affiliation.
Hello, my name is Tanya Dorland. I'm with the Public Advocate's Office, and I wanted to just ask a point of clarification on Scott Harvey with the NSC's presentation regarding remaining issues with the CAISO's resource sufficiency test. I thought I heard him say that demand response performance in the summer played a role in CAISO's false positive on the resource sufficiency test, and I just wanted to confirm that is what he was implying.
Yeah, and Tanya, I'm not sure that Dr. Harvey's still on. If he is, Dr. Harvey, if you are, see if we can unmute you.
You're still on the line. You can press pound 2 to identify.
I did. I pressed pound 2. Can you hear me?
Yep. Go ahead.
Okay. No, I was not saying I was saying you should have passed the test because we did activate demand response. The demand response did reduce load, so that although we entered a stage 2 emergency because we were running out of capacity, the CAISO took actions that restored that generation margin and enabled the CAISO to pass the bid range test. So that the confusion and the question that was posed, how can you pass the bid range test after you've entered stage 2 emergency, is partly answered by once the CAISO entered stage 2 emergency, it did things that enabled it to increase the bid range, which was activate demand response, which did perform, and I think that's appropriate, that if the demand response restored the bid range, then the CAISO should pass the test.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Harvey, and thanks, Tanya, for the question. Ethan, do you want to one more check of the queue?
At this time, I still see no further hands raised in the queue, but would you like to give it a moment, or?
Yeah, why don't you ask one more time, see if there's anything.
Alrighty, once again, you can join the queue by pressing #2 on your telephone keypad. I'll go ahead and give it a minute to see if anybody joins. Once again, it is #2. At this time, I still see no further hands raised.
Okay, well, at this time, we'll close the public comment section and move on. Thank you, Ethan. So now we turn to any of the deliberations by the governing body, and then leading up to any motions you want to make. Just a couple of points. I think the proposed motion we have in the board book was, I think it kind of lumped the first two together as primary and the second one as advisory. Is that okay, or does the governing body want to split them up and vote individually on the first two items, or are you okay with as it is? Anybody want to change the lumping?
Yeah, John, in terms of the advisory, we normally also vote on whether or not that's going to be written or verbal. On the ones where we're primary, I don't think we need to do that. So it seems like we should have them split.
Well, again, that just to be clear, I was asking about both of them that are primary. Right now, I think they're lumped together.
Oh, got it. No, I'm good with them being together, myself.
Okay.
Same here. I'm okay with the motion and putting them together.
Okay. And nobody's making a motion yet. I think we first need to discuss it and get anybody's discussions out on the table from the governing body. So I'll open it up before we go to the motion.
So, John, my question would be, I know staff has said that they're going to continue working on this, but do they have a proposed schedule of when they will start the continuation of the working on it, or is it just going to follow along? So if people are looking for when that first stakeholder call is going to be, or what is the actual timeline we're talking about, is there anything that staff could provide on that?
Mark? Maybe you're the guy.
Yeah, I'd like to maybe defer this to Guillermo Bautista when he presents his benefits. He's closest to the item in terms of what additional analysis can and when it can be done, and he could provide you some additional insights when he speaks to you.
Mark, I'm just going to say, just given the importance of this topic, that we will circle back in the next 24 hours as a team and start figuring out when we can start. We want to get these short-term issues addressed. This important meeting today because we've got some action items for the summer, but clearly we'll circle back shortly with folks on a schedule and timing of how we're going to take these things on. It's obviously of critical importance to all of you and to our stakeholders.
Okay. Okay, I do have one other question, and that was the public comment we just got from Pacific Gas and Electric Project. He referenced an after-the-fact report. Should the ISO implement what's on the table in front of us today? Is there any plan for any sort of an after-the-fact report on the outcome of the decisions after they've been implemented?
We will commit to an additional report out on the performance of the measures.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Appreciate that. Any other governing body questions or discussion?
So this is Val. And I'll just admit my fret when we first started looking at these issues. Maybe it was only a couple months ago. Sorry. that we were going to be overwhelmed by the amount that was going to have to be done before June 1st. I do appreciate what we have in front of us today as being a more doable list of actions that can be taken between now and implemented by June 1st. I know they're not perfect, but I think perhaps, and I am going to vote to support this, I think perhaps that sometimes you have to do something reasonable, reasoned and reasonable to make progress, and that, we may need to put in a circuit breaker action if things aren't going the way they're supposed to be going. But I understand CAISO is committed to doing so. So again, I really do think big thanks go out to the stakeholder community. I know not everybody is supportive of what we have in front of us, and it has resulted in us requesting things like follow-up reports and even that circuit breaker action. So thank you.
Thank you, Val. I echo what you just said. Okay, well, at that point, I guess, Carl?
Hi, thank you, John. So I also will be voting in favor of this. I also appreciate staff's work to identify some implementable fixes, even though they're only partial fixes. So I commend them for that work, and I look forward to these follow-up activities. I do have an additional request that I'd like to make on a related matter, but I would rather vote on this first, and so I just ask you, Chair, if I could have a moment to make a comment following our vote on these matters.
Sure, we can do that. All the matters are just the first two in front of us right now.
Right.
Okay, well, after we vote on this, then I will give you the floor. So any other comments before we have the reading of the motion?
John?
Yes.
I'd like to make a few comments, and I was prepared to make more, but I think the value of the presentation and comments here today eliminate the need for a lot of that. And I think it's gone a long ways to clarify things and to get commitments so that this is followed as it gets implemented. Really, as we know, CAISO was really has two options here. They've already explained, and I think everyone's concurred, that there needs to be a more significant work effort in addressing this. And so that steps is already in motion. So when we talk about this summer, there's the option of do nothing or do something. I think the do nothing option is really tough to take in light of last year. And so I think it needs to be an honest effort as to how far that can go. And I side right now on the perspective that this is a modest approach as opposed to doing too much. And so as we look at all this, I do think it steps in the right direction. And stated also differently, I don't think it steps in the wrong direction. It doesn't address all the defects, but we already knew that. And it's going to be captured in the more holistic approach to what's being done. As through the analysis by DMM and MSC, doesn't harm reliability, and it does help prepare or help entities prepare to operate more reliably. So, kind of all that stated together, it puts us in a better position on having a better outcome this summer should another large stress event occur. And kind of with those reasonings, I will vote in favor of the motion to approve the management proposal.
Okay, thank you, Rob. I appreciate that. Okay. Moment of silence here while we think. I guess at this point we could have a reading of the motion. Usually we have Mr. Colleton read the motion, but
very adept at that, and I'm having a little bit of a technical difficulty at the moment because so we have the two motions. So let me start with the primary authority motion. Is that okay, or did you want to start with the advisory on scarcity pricing?
John, you're muted.
Sorry. Well, it probably wasn't worth me talking anyway. No, I just said, I think the way to do this, Roger, is to do this primary one first, and then give us time to discuss the next one and decide whether we're going to make comments or not, and then we'll do the motion. So let's just do this first one.
Okay. Sorry about that. With a little bit of technical difficulty, I missed that nuance. So let's start with the first one here. Move that the EIM governing body approves the proposal for enhancements to the resource sufficiency evaluation and to address the energy interchange modeling issues as described in the memorandum dated March 3rd, 2021. And move that the EIM governing body authorizes management to make all necessary and appropriate filings with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to implement the proposal described in the memorandum, including any filings that implement the overarching initiative policy but contain discrete revisions to incorporate Commission guidance in any initial ruling on that proposed tariff amendment. And so we need a motion.
So moved. This is Val.
Val, and second?
I will second that. That's Rob.
Thank you, Rob. And let me go ahead and take your votes. Chair Prescott?
Aye.
All right, we're going to have discussion. Are we going to have discussion after the motion?
Yeah.
Yes, on the scarcity, on the advisory portion.
Let's stop right here. Anita, what's your question?
So I thought after the motion was read, there was another opportunity for discussion.
We can before we vote. So go ahead.
Yeah, we can stop right here and supplement the discussion.
But I probably should have done it before. I'm still kind of thinking about it. So I'm supporting this because the preponderance of stakeholders support this particular action. So I'm going to support that. Having listened to their comments, both pro and con, I'm going to go with the majority that think that these changes will be to the benefit overall. And I appreciate that staff is going to keep a pretty close eye on these and that further work will continue to be done. So I wanted to just say that, and I probably should have said it before, Roger, you read the motion, but I thought there would be another discussion once the motion is read. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. So, all right, so we were on your vote. And your vote, Vice Chair Decker?
Yes.
Okay. Member Fawn?
Yes.
Member Linville?
Yes.
Member Konzioka?
Yes.
Okay, the primary authority motion passes. And now is a good time to discuss the advisory opinion.
Very good. So any discussion on the advisory vote on the pricing? And if anybody, if it looks like we're going to, and my vote would be to advise the Board of Governors to approve this, is there any need for us to do written comments? Does anybody want written comments if we approve this? Okay, any other discussion before we bring this one to a vote? A motion and a vote. Okay.
Hi, John. This is Stacey Carpenter. We are working on the language on that advisory motion, so if we could just pop back to this, maybe we could let Khaled go with the implementation.
I have the language, Stacey.
Oh, do you? Oh, great. Okay, perfect.
Good. On the fly, he does it. Okay, Roger?
I am that good. Just ask me. Okay. So, okay. I do have it now. See, I just have to delay a little bit. Move that the EAM governing body will provide verbal advisory input to the ISO Board of Governors as discussed at its March 10th, 2021 General Session meeting, supporting management's position on scarcity pricing as set forth in the memorandum dated March 3rd, 2021.
So moved. This is Val.
Val is one. And I'm sorry, was that Anita second?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. And your vote, Chair Prescott?
Aye.
Vice Chair Decker?
Yes.
Member Fong?
Yes.
Member Linville?
Aye.
And Member Konziolka?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you, governing body members. Sorry for the brief little glitch there, but I think we may now proceed on to the next item.
Thank you, Roger, and thanks to everybody that worked on all these issues. As others have pointed out, that everybody has worked hard for a long period of time on these. So just to get to this point, thank you. More to come. All right, so moving on, we've got a briefing on EIM implementations. Khaled?
Yes, good afternoon, Chair Prescott and Vice Chair Decker and members of the governing body. Just a quick, I want to be very respectful to your time this afternoon, so I'm going to be very brief. Next slide, please. This is just to tell you that for the spring implementation, the 5 EIM entities that we are implementing for, in 2 phases, March 25th and also April 1st. We have 4 of those EIM entities. They're going to go as planned: Bank, TID, LA, and PNM. Northwestern, we are also on track for everything seems to be in place, but the go live date for Northwestern is going to be mid-June, June 16, I think, is going to be. And the reason for that, we both agreed that we will give Northwestern a little bit more time for having more time for the training and preparation for the go live for their operators. The other side, which is the 2022, those are also moving on track. No, nothing to report at this time. And Evangrid, I just wanted to ensure that you are aware that Evangrid and the recently signed El Paso Electric are going to be in the 2023 implementation. With that, thank you for your time. If there's any question, I'd be happy to answer. I'm trying to be very, again, respectful of your time without going into details.
Well, Khaled, thank you for the report, and we need to take the time because this is important stuff. So does the governing body have any questions on this? It's a horrendous undertaking when we go back to when we started and we had like 1 or 2 that we would bring on at a time. To the quantity that's being implemented simultaneously is hats off to the entities and the ISO to put it together. Rob, did you have a comment?
Khalid, more of a question, and they kind of touched on it, and I just would like you to amplify it that, we know there's a lot of challenges. COVID has really changed the environment and what you can do. And with the go live, I assume because of this report, you're stating we are in good shape and that everything is good to go as you described it.
Yeah, that is correct. COVID has been a challenge for everybody, but I think the EIM entities have done a wonderful job. It is, impacting us in terms of the, getting also the Northwestern on the same time. We were hoping that they would go in April, but we are very respectful of, the challenges that they are facing. So the additional time will give them that, that certainty about the go live. The rest of the EIMs, we are all ready. We certified. We filed actually the certification with FERC. And even for Northwestern, we collected all of the certification evidence that we need, but we did not file until we are, ready about the go live date, which will be probably at the beginning of May. We will file that. We are, we have the plans. We did the parallel operation with all of them, and that was very successful. We're gonna just repeat the same plan for the go live, and hopefully this will be as smooth as the parallel operation went. Very smooth.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Can I make a quick comment? Sorry, and I'm trying not to belabor this, but I just want to say the fact that we don't have a whole lot of questions really drives at the successes that you've had in the past. So, Khaled, don't take that as disinterest. It is sort of a trust factor sense because everything has gone so well up to this point in time.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Well said, Val. Any other questions? Khaled, thank you very much for your report.
You're welcome.
Okay, next up we have a briefing on Western EIM benefits. Anna and Guillermo.
Yes, hi everybody again. Guillermo will be presenting to you, and in the interest of time, I won't make too many preliminary comments. He will be presenting to you our latest benefits studies results. Just in terms of the scheduling, we were not able to provide you with a briefing previously, so we wanted to take some time today to give you a briefing on the latest results. And with that, I will turn it over to Guillermo Bautista Alderete, who should be on the line.
Thank you, Anna. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me, EIM governing body members. I will go straight to one slide that is only the summary of the benefits given the short time that we have. Can we move to the next slide, please? Okay. EIM benefit that continue to accrue with Q4 2020, totaling $68.86 million, which makes a total cumulative of $1.18 billion so far since the inception of the EIM market. You can see the cumulative benefits are growing quite steeply, and that is mainly when a new EIM entity joins the EIM because it will accrue benefits for itself, but it will also enable more transfers among other areas. So this is a compounding effect that we continue to see as the main reasons for the benefits to increase that steeply. The benefits reflect three main components: more efficient dispatch, that is among different areas, but also within each area, the reduction of renewable energy curtailments, and also the reduction of flexible reserves that are needed for each balancing area. I think this is the main item for the overall update I wanted to provide you. There are other metrics across the presentation related to prices, transfers, wheels. I will be open to have any answer you may want to look for. And before closing this presentation, and based on the earlier discussion about the resource sufficiency test, I can assure you we are committed to provide the expected transparency in this area. First, we will review and document any remaining questions from the MSC and the stakeholder about this resource sufficiency test. We will provide more forensics about the sufficiency test and explain how was the case of past during these summer events. We can provide this through an ad hoc analysis, and we will make this available in the upcoming weeks. I think this will serve as a starting point for the upcoming discussions of the further enhancements related to the sufficiency test. Furthermore, moving forward, we commit to increase the transparency in this area with two items. The first one is that we will expand the material that we present in the Market Performance Forum. That is a regular update we provide to the market. And second, we will start including a section on the resource sufficiency test to this regular EIM briefing that we provide to the EIM governing body. So with that, I will be happy to address any questions you may have.
Any questions for Guillermo on this? Appreciate the abbreviated presentation, but this is all good data, and we can look at it and get an idea of what's going on. Okay, nothing? Okay, thanks for the presentation, Guillermo. We do really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'd like to turn it to Carl and see what it is. I hope this is timely to. You've got the floor. How's that?
Oh, okay. So I just, as we were discussing the Readiness initiative before, I didn't want to detract from the ISO's primary responsibility to watch after its own knitting and to address the issues that the ISO directly has control over. So I really appreciate that conversation and appreciate that discussion. I have just a ancillary request that the other half of these hands clapping is for the resources to show up to make sure that we have adequate resources in the summer. And to that, we primarily turn to the proceeding underway at the PUC with two tracks, a supply proceeding and a demand-side resource proceeding. And I just want to emphasize the importance of both of those sides of the proceeding, the importance of the demand-side resources. I want to appreciate the fact that the PUC chose to have a track of the proceeding address demand-side resources and address their contribution. I do feel that the California ISO can be very helpful in implementing that part of the PUC track recommendations. I know that the ISO is engaged in that proceeding, and I hope that the measures being discussed in that proceeding receive vibrant attention by stakeholders and by the ISO to make sure that we have substantially increased demand-side resources. And I guess with that, John, I'll leave it there. And thank you for the opportunity to make that comment.
Well, thank you, Carl. Appreciate your comment. So with that, Elliot Mainzer has asked to make a final comment, so I'd open the floor up to Elliot.
Thank you, Chair Prescott. I just wanted to, at the risk of being just a little bit repetitive, I'm just reflecting. I think this has just been an incredibly important meeting today. And I want to personally just to acknowledge one more time, I think that when we're talking about resource efficiency, literally nothing less than the trust in our market is at stake. And I learned over the past decade working on a lot of these issues how foundational sufficiency is. And also when we're hearing such concern from so many of our stakeholders, I just think it's really important for the ISO just to recognize how critical an issue this is. I want to give you my personal assurance as the president and CEO of the organization that we've heard the comments today, that we're going to take it very much to heart, and we will be responding in short order with a set of sort of next steps to address these residual forensic questions and to make sure that the experience of all the stakeholders going into the summer and beyond meets their expectations vis-a-vis the transparency around this issue. So I just felt it's just important. This is really a critical issue. I want to thank you to the governing body today for the support, for the initial steps that we're taking, and the broader recognition of both the MSC and DMM that these, I think, are important steps. But we know we have work to do, and just wanted to make sure that nobody should walk away from this meeting with any uncertainty that the ISO doesn't get it. So thank you again for your support today, and we look forward to working with all of you.
Well, thanks, Elliot. Really appreciate your comments and your support. This is such an important thing for the region, and we want to get it right, and we want to be fair and transparent to everyone. So thank you for that. Okay, I think we're getting down towards the end. Let's see. We have the informational reports. I'm not going to bring them up unless there's any questions from the governing body on those. They were presented to you in your board book. Okay. And with that, I want to thank Ethan and Christina for your help in putting this together. And and one of these days we'll actually be able to meet in person. So with that, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for using AT&T Event Conferencing Enhancements. You may now disconnect.